Whoops, I think I wasn't on audio there for a second. Welcome everyone to the webinar today. We are so thrilled to have you with us. I am very excited to have you on this call today. For those of you coming in right now, I'd love for you to put into the chat what state you manage your rental property in, just so we can get a better idea of where you're coming from. Would love to hear it. Seeing California, Florida in the chat, more Californias, Illinois, Atlanta, Ohio. Awesome. Thanks and welcome everyone to the webinar. Let me backtrack here a little bit on our slides to our title slide. Trust no one, check them out, how to screen everyone from your property manager to your doctor. So today I will be your presenter. My name is Alexandra Alvarado. I'm the Director of Marketing and Education here at the American Apartment Owners Association. And the reason why we're doing this topic is actually because on our last webinar, I asked you all if you had a preference for a topic for me to cover, and I gave you about 6 different options, and this one was the winner. And I am so happy that you all chose this topic. But before we get started, what I'm going to do is just go over some housekeeping items. One is I'm going to be sharing this full presentation with you tomorrow via email, and I will also send you the full recording so you can always catch up if you miss anything. And if you have any questions, I will be taking those at the very end in the question box. We may go over 60 minutes depending on how many questions you have. It's totally optional to stay past that point. And if you do have to leave, I understand, but we will be recording it so you can always look back at that. So I want to start off with a quick exercise. And the first thing I want to do is issue you a quick poll question here. So I want to know, how many of you run a background check on all your tenants? So go ahead and mark yes or no here. I know we've done so many webinars about the importance of running a background check on tenants. And so I'm hoping most of you say yes. I'll give you just a little bit of time here to enter in your response. All right. And let's share the results. So it looks like the majority of you said yes. Awesome. I wish that was 100%, but I'll take the 78%. That's pretty good. So great. Now let's look at maybe the next question here. I'm curious to see this one. Do you run a background check before you hire a contractor or maintenance professionals? So this would be your plumber, your AC person, or if you have a handyman that you use, or you're doing a renovation, would you run a background check on that individual? Go ahead and mark yes or no. I'll give you just a little bit of time there on that one. Interesting. So I'm getting more no's than yeses, which I sort of expected, and it's great that you're on this call. Let me go ahead and share those results with you real quick. So it looks like about 85% of you said no, that you currently don't run a background check before you hire a vendor. And I'd love to know why. So go ahead and put that in the chat as well. Why don't you screen your vendors by running a background check? So that would be like a criminal at least, or license verification. Go ahead and share your story there in the chat. I'd love to hear what you have to say. So what does screening your tenants and screening your vendors have in common? Well, in both cases, you are trying to protect your rental investment. So with tenants, you want to ensure that they're able to pay rent on time, that they are going to be responsible individuals, and you are basically entrusting them with an asset that's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes $1 million over, depending on where you are. For those of you in California, I wouldn't be surprised if some of your properties are well over that. And of course, you want to make sure that you're handing those keys to someone you can trust. Likewise, when you are hiring a contractor, a maintenance professional, a property manager, you are also probably handing them the keys, and you're giving them access to your property as well. And you're also trusting them to have face-to-face interactions with your tenants, who are essentially your clients and the lifeblood of your business. So to complete this first exercise, I'd like you to put in the chat whether you've ever had a very poor experience with a vendor, like a contractor or a maintenance professional or property manager or an investment partner. Basically, have you ever felt ripped off? Because honestly, that is something that happens so much in our industry. And even if you've had a lot of experience, you may still find you're getting burned, perhaps by some of your vendors. So also would love to hear some of those stories in the chat. Yes, Shiva says they were unlicensed and they CSLB could do nothing. I think that's the consumer office. California makes it easy. In Kentucky, only plumbers and electricians are licensed, and it makes it very hard. Yeah, and this is why I'm here. I lost thousands in attorney's fees, says Howard. So yeah, we've all kind of been there at, to some degree or another. So I want to get started here into today's agenda real quick. We're going to go over some fraud statistics, liability case studies, investing case studies, and personal case studies. A lot of case studies today. And I really want you to be patient with it because I know you might be thinking, what's the point when I'm going through some of these stories? But if you hang in there with me, I promise you, there will be a point. And also the power of data, and more importantly, how you can access it, and how to research, question, and monitor all of the people that you work with. And at the end, we'll have the Q&A. And a quick little legal disclaimer here. I'm not an attorney, so everything I'm saying today isn't considered legal advice. We do request that you consult with your attorney to make sure that you're up to date on your local laws and that you don't make any changes unless it's approved by your attorney or any of your superiors. So let's go over some statistics. So let's think about the FTC, right? So they have many scam and reports that come through to them, and they have a snapshot of what happened in 2022. And the top 5 frauds were: 1, imposters. So someone pretending to be someone that they're not. 2, online shopping frauds. 3, prizes, sweepstakes, lotteries. 4, investments, including real estate investments. And 5, business and job opportunities. So often when we think of fraud and scams, we think of those 2 and 3 online shopping sweepstakes kind of frauds that maybe grandma can fall for. But although those do comprise a large portion of fraud, they are becoming more sophisticated. And you can see that investments and imposters are 2 big ones as well in the top 5. And those are specifically a lot of them targeting real estate. So let's move on to a couple more. So losses to investment scams more than doubled from 2021 with 1.8 billion to 2022 with 3.8 billion. So people are losing more money now than ever. We're also seeing losses to businesses increasing. So 196 million in 2020, 453 million. That was a huge jump in 2021 around the pandemic, and a whopping 660 million last year. So you are a business. If you're thinking you're not, you're mistaken. A rental, even if you just have one, is a business. So you are susceptible. Also, interestingly, there were 2.4 million fraud reports this last year, and 8.8 billion reported lost. Now, even though the number of reports is down from 2021, the amount lost is up. To me, what that says is that these scams are getting more and more sophisticated, and that there are fewer attempts with more money being extracted. So that is a very interesting piece of data. I love statistics, so I thought that would be an interesting way for us to start. Now, real estate presents one of the most opportune times to interfere with a large transaction, often one of the largest transactions that you'll ever make in your life. So what's been happening lately is hackers are finding openings in title companies or realtors' email accounts to track upcoming purchases and that are scheduled to close. And they appear to be using their own bank account, and they they direct the funds to their bank account, quickly close them, and they're gone without a trace. So they pretend to be someone who you know, and they come from that email address. So it seems very legitimate. The problem is so widespread that in California, the Association of Realtors has specifically included this phrase here in red on all of their real estate contracts to never wire or electronically transfer funds prior to confirming the transfer instructions using a phone number that you were provided previously. So that is just something that I wanted to bring up because I think it is a no-brainer that we should definitely know and all be practicing to be very cautious with our email accounts. My email, often I'll see, attempts at phishing scams and whatnot. So definitely be aware of what those look like. And also, if something were to happen, there is something called the financial fraud kill chain, under which the FBI could stop a transfer and recover those lost funds if it's over $50,000 and the transfer is sent internationally. The bank issues a call notice, and then you alert the FBI within 72 hours. So action must be taken quickly if you are to really do anything about it. But unfortunately, often the scam artists get away pretty much with no problem. So it is still very much so something that is affecting many homeowners and real estate investors even. And there is a whole link here that I put for fraud prevention that I'll share with you tomorrow. And you can see some of the other types of multifamily fraud as well that are occurring. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Now, what I really wanted to go over today is not just those extreme sort of versions of fraud. On the other end of the spectrum, you have what is not considered strictly fraud, but it is a misrepresentation. So this is much more common, much more likely for you to be susceptible to. And essentially, it doesn't get reported to the Federal Trade Commission. So it wouldn't be a part of the statistics that we saw. Often this comes in the form of a contractor who is unlicensed, misrepresenting their ability to perform a job, an investment partner who promises a return that they know is unlikely to ever happen, a property management company that has been sued multiple times and could get you in trouble because of their poor business practices. So we're going to dive into some of these real estate case studies to illustrate what types of bad business deals and partnerships you should look out for. And then we'll discuss those screening and monitoring of new vendors, brokers, contractors, business partners, and even professionals like your doctor, like your nanny, your accountant. So this really does spread to more than just your real estate business. So let's talk about your liability. And I think the best way to do this is to illustrate it with an example. So let's say you have a rehab investment property and you're pressed for time and on a budget. You could end up hiring someone who's unlicensed, or you're relying maybe too much on word of mouth and you don't check their license. So a recent California case called Jones versus Sorensen is a great example. So there was a property owner, and her name was Danita Sorensen. And she hired a company called Designs by Leo to do her landscaping. And that company was owned by this woman, Odette Miranda. And Odette Miranda hired someone to work for her. And she hired Mary Jones, who in this case is the victim. She was employed by Odette. Mary Jones was using a ladder to trim a 15-foot tall oak tree. And for whatever reason, she fell about 10 feet and was pretty seriously injured. Now, you might be thinking, why would Mary Jones file a lawsuit against Danita, the property owner, if Odette was the person who hired her? Well, it turns out that normally a property owner would not be financially liable for the injuries of someone employed by a general contractor, but it turns out Odette was not licensed. And so if the person that hired her isn't licensed, the liability falls 100% to the property owner. And when I read this, I thought, really? Odette gets away and Danita here is the one who's at fault? And the answer is yes. So believe it or not, Odette is fine here in this case. It's Danita who really has the issue. And I'm sure Danita felt that Odette was a great landscaper, she was going to really bring great employees to her. She probably assumed she was licensed, or could have been licensed at some point. Her license may have expired and Danita didn't know. So there are maybe a couple reasons why Danita wasn't informed or didn't go through the trouble of checking that license, but ultimately Danita was held responsible for all of Mary Jones's medical bills. And so when you're hiring someone, you must make sure that they are licensed, especially if they will be hiring someone else underneath them. Otherwise, if something happens to that employee, you can be held liable. Now, this is California. Of course, it could vary in other states, but you don't want to be the test case, right? You don't want to be Danita Sorensen, where you find out that this is how the law applies to you. So that's one really good example, I think. Another one as well, if you're thinking, okay, well, I have a property manager and they hire all the maintenance professionals that we use, so I don't have to worry about liability. Well, that's not really the case either. So although property managers have some liability, ultimately the property owner is responsible for the property manager's actions under the concept of law of agency. So let's take another example. So a couple who owned a 10-unit building hired a property manager to deal with their rental property. And they received shortly after a notification from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, so that's HUD, that one of their tenants had filed a complaint against them, claiming that their property manager had sexually harassed her. So of course, the property owners had no idea that this was going on, but are they liable in this case for what the property manager did? And the answer is yes. Unfortunately, both federal and state fair housing laws impose absolute vicarious liability on property owners when management violates the law. So in other words, if your property manager violates the tenant's rights under fair housing laws, you may be held legally and financially responsible for what the manager did, even if you had no part in the illegal behavior and no knowledge of it at the time that it happened. So this liability applies not just to the actions of the manager, but any employee or independent contractor you hire. You might have contact with tenants. So lawsuits like these are becoming more and more common. This is why it is so important to start thinking of your vendors as employees and to make sure that they are knowledgeable about the law and that they take those laws very seriously. Ultimately, they are an extension of you. They are representing you. This includes running a proper criminal background check and civil lawsuit check, license check, ensuring that they don't already have a history of doing this type of thing, because that's even worse, right? If you not only hired them, but should have seen that they had a history of doing this, then it really becomes obvious the negligence that you may have undergone. So although you're turning over the responsibility for the day-to-day management of your apartment building or your single family rental, ultimately, you're not turning over the responsibility for adhering to fair housing laws. So a word of warning for those of you who didn't know that. And another common issue that we've seen pop up are all these investing coaches and programs that promise huge returns. And even though it may not seem that they are a scam, some of them have been lately questioned pretty heavily. And in fact, just yesterday, I can't believe this, just yesterday, the timing on this is crazy because I put on some Google alert notifications and I heard this study and I just added it in. Basically, the Federal Trade Commission and the Utah Division of Consumer Protection announced a $16.7 million settlement with a company called Response Marketing LLC, which alleged to use false promises to sell real estate investing training programs. And there are two real estate celebrities who backed this company. One of them is Scott Yancey from an A&E show called Flipping Vegas, and Dean Graziosi, host of the popular podcast Own Your Future. They are now liable to pay $1.7 million as a part of this whole scheme. What's crazy about this is that I'm sure people who were a part of these training programs thought, well, gosh, this man is on TV and the other one has a hugely successful podcast. Of course, they know what they're doing, and I should trust what they're saying if I want to be as successful as them. And essentially, response marketing would entice customers to buy these 3-day workshops for about $1,000 and falsely represent that they would be giving them special tools that would enable them to become more successful in real estate, and then deceptively pitching more expensive training programs all the way up to $30,000. And according to the complaint, most consumers who purchased those products and services didn't become successful real estate investors, and they didn't recoup any of their money lost through those training programs. So again, a word of caution: not all coaching and investing programs are bad. Not all of them are a scam, but it is crucial to know that this company, what is it called here? Response Marketing LLC, is actually a shell company that had many complaints already issued years before that had never really came to fruition. It wasn't really until literally yesterday that this happened. And so sometimes these sort of things do take some time to actually have the justice served, but there are warning signs. So normally there are complaints, normally there are very bad reviews. Sometimes you can even find civil lawsuits that maybe have been unsuccessful. But in essence, this was not something that this company hadn't been questioned about before. So again, be careful which kind of programs and coaching, investing kind of things that you're getting yourself involved with, especially if it's a substantial amount of money. And I put the link here to the case, which I'll share with you tomorrow, so you can look it up if you're curious to learn more. So another one as well that we've seen a lot is going into business with an investing partner. So this is something that you might want to do to allow yourself to be able to afford maybe some of the properties that maybe would be lucrative, but you can't get into just yourself, or you want to split up the management tasks. Surely investment partnerships aren't a bad idea when done properly and when there is due diligence done on the partner. If it's a friend or family member, you still need to do this. Okay, so this goes for any kind of investing partner. So in this example, I want to give you, in 2004, you have Bill Lunsford and Wally Price. They formed the Riverfront Company LLC. They were going to develop a real estate property in Tuscaloosa called the Tuscaloosa Riverwalk. Lunsford owned 2/3 and Price owned 1/3. And in 2009, suddenly Lunsford said to Price that he couldn't afford to continue. He had to basically back out of the project, and that he was going to sell his share, his 2/3 share of ownership, to Danny Butler. And he urged Price to do the same. And so, lacking the capital to stay in the project without Lunsford, Price basically relinquished his interest in the company. He thought it was kind of over. So then on December 29th, 2012, a few years later, all of a sudden, a colleague named Jerry Griffin tells Price that Lunsford was building condominiums on that land that Lunsford and Price had once owned through the company. And Price asked about this Butler, Danny Butler guy that he was going to sell his share to. What happened to him? And it turns out Butler was never involved in the project. Lunsford lied to Wally Price to basically take his share of the company all to himself. And he started his own new company and started developing real estate all on his own. So he basically fraudulently took over the company and pretended that this Butler guy was just the reason. So the court ruled in favor of, unfortunately here, in favor of Lunsford. And it was reasoned that Price should have known that Butler was not involved because Butler wasn't on the documents that Price signed, and there was no mention of him. And so it turns out that if you don't read what you sign and you sign something that says that the ownership should be going to Lunsford, even if Lunsford is telling him one thing, if the contract says another, the contract still holds. So there are a few lessons to be learned here. So one is to always read what you're signing. Two is not to trust your partners 100%. Always ask questions, always ask to see proof. And I actually looked up the property. This is a real case study. This photo you see here is the building that Bill Lunsford owns himself 100%. And technically he's not guilty, but it might be a red flag that he's been sued multiple times, which is in fact the case. And he is essentially not guilty of anything, but is he a scam artist? I think so, kind of, right? You know, he definitely was dishonest to get to this place that he's in his real estate investing career. So these are the kind of red flags that you should be looking out for. So a simple Google search brought up this case, but certainly not everything makes it into the media. So having a civil lawsuit case in which you could see what happened in a certain lawsuit would definitely maybe open your eyes if Bill Lunsford were to come up to you and ask you to invest with him in a new project. All right, so we've covered some examples of fraud and deceptive behaviors in your real estate business, but this can also happen to you on a personal level. So think about choosing a doctor for an upcoming surgery, only to find out later that they are undergoing an investigation for malpractice. Or what about you hire a nanny only to find they have a criminal past and they've spending time with your children? I think this is one that I think is very and particularly awful that has been going around, which is adoption scams. So there is a company called the Adoption Network, started in 1996 by Alan and Carol Gindy. Essentially, potential parents, I should say, who've never been able to have children of their own, they often will seek private adoption agencies. There are many of them in the United States. They are highly unregulated. And unfortunately, you know, you have, let's say, Mary and John, they've been trying to have children for years. And suddenly they find a private adoption agency that promises them a little baby boy within the next 8 months. And they meet the mother, they get pictures, they are able to maybe even talk to her. Maybe they don't meet her in person, but maybe it's a FaceTime. You can see her face. She asks for them to send her supplies and whatnot. They have their nursery that they're starting to build out and they're getting very excited, maybe a baby shower as well. And they go finally on the day of to pick up the baby, only to find out that the mother has suddenly changed her mind. So this can happen, certainly, but if a company has a history of doing this over and over and over again, and then not refunding the money, that's where the scam lies. Or taking advantage of potentially adoptive mothers who are pregnant and looking to maybe, be a part of the program and being deceptive with them as well. There are many ways in which the scam works, but essentially the worst part of it is having a couple that is looking forward to being parents only to have their money taken away, tens of thousands of dollars in the process. Often they'll keep asking for more money to reassign them to different mothers, birthing mothers, until essentially, they figure out that it is a scam. So this company is one of the largest, and it is claimed to be, they claim that they're a law corporation offering adoption services. But in 2006, the Orange County District Attorney filed a scathing complaint contending that this couple who owns this company had committed 11 violations, falsely operating as a law firm without an attorney, falsely advertising as having nursing degrees, and they admitted no wrongdoing. They paid a huge fine, and they are still operating today, and they are in business. So unfortunately, justice isn't always served. These companies don't always get shut down, but they do get violations. They do get put on public record. So this is just one example of a personal sort of case study in which, if you are going to do anything that is highly emotional, that it has a high price tag, that is, very important to you, your family, your health, these are all reasons to be even more cautious than ever. So let's talk now about the power of data. So there's nothing worse than learning these lessons the hard way, but the good news is that it's never been easier or more efficient to gather actionable data that you can use to help your business and your personal life. So the data is there for you to use, but only if you search for it. So there are several reports, like your tenant screening reports that you order now on tenants, that you can use before making any important hiring decision or business transaction. So we're going to go over some of these reports, but to start, I'd like to mention that these searches, almost all of them are anonymous, and unlike a tenant credit report, you don't have to have a signed release. So this is different in terms of the laws that apply. With tenancy, there are many more consumer protection laws that apply. With this, the data is public, and simply you're getting access to it in a very fast and efficient way. So InfomatchPlus is the company that does this, and I think they do it very well. They search public record information and they deliver it to you in a very digestible, easy to read fashion. So I'm going to go over what some of those reports are. Number one, a criminal background check. So I think this is a no-brainer, right? So we talked about this at the beginning. Now, criminal background check can include misdemeanors, felonies, sex offenders, OFAC, terrorist, and federal. So this is going to be all of your exclusion lists, America's Most Wanted, terrorist lists, any sort of bans for transacting in the United States. That is all in that report. It's actually not one report, it's about 100 reports in one. And the requirement to run this is just a name and date of birth. That is all you need. And what you want to do is normally ask for some sort of ID. I think that's just a good thing to do anyway, right? To have a valid ID on the individual that you're working with. So this can help you in a number of ways. One, you could use it to do a criminal background check. Two, you can also have their license verified, which we'll talk about later, and just know who they are so that if later there is a problem, you know how to find them, you know that they're a real person and that they're not an imposter, which we saw was the #1 type of fraud in the United States last year. So this all starts with collecting an ID and then running a criminal background check. Now, this is part of your due diligence when running your business as well. So just as if you were to get a tenant into your property who commits a crime and you didn't run a background check on them, likewise with any vendors or contractors that are interacting with tenants and you don't run a background check on them, there is still a sense of liability there because maybe you should have known. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing with these case studies is a lot of times the judges will say that in, more or less words, you should have known. This is your job to know. So this is one way to do it on InfomatchPlus. And what's great about this as well is if you do collect the ID, you get multiple names. So you get the middle name, the exact spelling. Right, and previous addresses. So This one is really important to know that who you're working with is who they say they are. So with InfomatchPlus, you have the ability to verify a social and know the date it was issued to make sure that matches their date of birth, the state in which it was issued, the status of the social security, whether, it's deceased, which would mean they're using a dead person's social. We've seen that before. Not to mention, you can also see the list of addresses, see if that matches up with where they've lived, and you can use those addresses to cross-reference any criminal records that you may find. So if they lived in a certain city, you may be able to find criminal records there as well. So the previous address history, just like for your tenant reports, is a very important report that can help you uncover even alias names as well. So if they've used a variation of their maiden name or variation of their first name, you would know based off of this report, and you can use those alternate names to run a criminal background check and make sure that they didn't, just have their name changed and move to another state. So for this, what's required is name and social security number. So I know some people may be very hesitant to give the social. I will say that there is nothing wrong with asking for one. So I was on the Social Security Administration website, and there is an FAQ that says, can anyone ask for your social? It says anyone can refuse to disclose his or her number, but the requester can refuse its services or to not do business with them. Businesses, banks, schools, private agencies are free to request someone's security number and use it for any purpose that does not violate federal or state law. And that is, an FAQ I can share with you if you're curious about the source. So I think this is becoming more common with fraud, also on the rise, being able to verify identity before hiring someone to work on your property or, partner with, for that matter. So financials. So for partnerships, financials are especially important, but I think also, you could do this for other businesses as well. You're basically looking at, looking up a business credit report. So this is different than a personal one. This is the business's practices, looking at what it is that, they are practicing, if they're paying their bills on time. We'll go over what that looks like in a moment. But all that's required for this one is a business name and address. It does take a few days to get this report, but it is well worth the wait. And we'll show you what that looks like in a moment. Now, the next one is NSF checks. So these are bad checks. Anyone with fraudulent or a history of writing bad checks, this would be great if you're working with a property management company or a different type of vendor to make sure that they have legit checks. The requirement is just a driver's license. Literally, that's it, to know whether or not they have been flagged. And then also civil judgments. So these are lawsuits of any kind that are either filed by the individual or against the individual. And it tells you what the status is of that lawsuit, if it's still underway, if it's already, done, and what the verdict was. So that, to me, is like one of the most important ones. These are on a personal level. So this is a person getting sued, right? And then we have tax liens, also personal. So state or federal tax liens, whether the person or the company will in the business credit report has tax liens. And lastly, bankruptcies. So obviously entering into a partnership with a person who's about to go bankrupt or has filed for bankruptcy recently is probably not a good idea. Doesn't mean that, and I think this is something else that I definitely want to bring up here with all of this, is it doesn't mean that you can't work with people who have a criminal past or that you can't work with people who have a bankruptcy. But one thing for sure, you cannot work with people who don't tell you the truth. So if they're telling you that they have a clean record and then you find something, that's where the problem lies. Otherwise, if they're upfront with you and they tell you, hey, I had a bad business deal, I went bankrupt, then it's up to you to make that decision if you feel comfortable with it. But the purpose of this is really to uncover what they haven't told you, perhaps. So I want to move on here to, and lastly, the requirements here are name, social, date of birth, and address. So these do require a little bit more data, but certainly if you're going to do any sort of serious business deal, I don't think your partner should have any problem with providing you with that. So this is a screenshot of a sample business credit report. It gives you a score. It is based on, I believe, 0 through 100, if I'm not mistaken. What I like about this is that it gives you not just what the company is doing in terms of payments and debt, but also an industry average. So for a property management company, is it normal for them to pay 60 days or 30 days or 90 days late on certain things? So this is kind of what this represents. It's giving you a sort of idea of what the industry looks like. And then underneath this, it shows you how much they have gone without paying rent. So days beyond term, total trade lines, that's the lines of credit, how much balance they have, so how much debt, and what's their credit limit. So this is a great snapshot of the health of the business. And I think even more is the number of past due accounts. What is the most they've ever been past due? So the most they've ever been late on payments. Maybe they had a rough season or something. You can also see here the current outstanding balances and which ones have been paid late. This business looks fairly solid. They don't have any sort of late payments or history of that. So that's great to see. And this is super important. This is my favorite part of the business credit report. It's the legal filings. So this means looking to see whether they've had any bankruptcies at the business level. So if the business has filed any lawsuits against the business, any tax lien filings against the business. So this is going to go back 6 years and 9 months for tax liens and judgments, bankruptcies, 9 years and 9 months. And UCC filings are basically when a borrower takes out a secured loan and utilizes equipment financing. So they establish a lien for that in case they default. So it's not a bad thing necessarily, just a good to know. But of course, you would hopefully see zeros and no on the bankruptcy for tax liens and judgments as well. So very, very amazing report. Also, if you have a commercial tenant that you want to rent to in real estate, so let's say you're renting out, you could also use this report. Just a little side note that their business may be good to check out in addition to their personal credit history. All right, license verification. So we talked about this already. A no-brainer. Basically, almost any license InfomatchPlus can verify for you. You just need to give them the license type and number. I know there are some websites that claim to say that any of their people have already been verified, but I still think you should do the check on your own. You don't know how long ago that was verified, how long that listing has been up. It's always better to just have that information for yourself. All right, some other reports kind of on the miscellaneous side. Motor vehicle report. So that requires just the driver's license number and type. This would be good if you have a vendor that will be driving on the property, operating a company vehicle, or personally, if you have a nanny who's driving your children around. I mean, I'd want to know if they had a DUI or record of a bunch of speeding tickets or a suspended license, right? So certainly you'd want to check that out. And again, if you're collecting that ID at the beginning, you already have all the information you need to run this report. And then a drug test, again, it kind of depends on what you're doing here. Now, all these reports are not meant to be for an actual employee that you're hiring full time, but if it's a requirement for you to work in a drug-free environment, then, or with people who aren't using drugs, then you can actually order this test, and the individual would they just take a form that you give to them. They go to the testing center, and once they get their test results, they get posted in your account because that form will be specific to you. So it tracks back to your InfomatchPlus account, which I think is really cool. This is the only one I think where obviously it's not anonymous, right? The applicant or the vendor, whoever is doing it, they know that they're being tested because they are taking that form. Now, coming soon are also credit reports on individuals. Now, this is different than a tenant screening credit report. This is for purposes other than tenant screening. So again, if you wanted to check your business partner's personal credit, you can do that. And technically, you're not supposed to use your tenant screening account to do those things. You're supposed to use a separate type of credit report, and that is going to be available soon on InfomatchPlus. And it does require their name and email. So once once you've requested the credit report, they're going to get an email notification. So this one is another one that's not anonymous. So they would need to know that you're running the credit check, but all the other ones are anonymous that I mentioned before. So certainly start thinking about some ways in which you could potentially be using these reports. All right, so moving on to the next section here. So if you are hiring your own maintenance professionals, it's a good idea to have a list already of approved vendors ready to go in case you need them. You don't want to be put in a position where you have an emergency situation and you have to use someone very quickly. You can't check out who they are. You don't have enough time to get a good referral or background check, right? So we want to do this as far ahead of time as we can, and make sure that you go through that approval process. So let's talk about online research. So let's say you found a potential vendor that you'd like to work with. Even if you ask your friends for references or a property manager in the area for references, it's still important for you to do your own research. So one of the ways to do that is to search for them on review sites. So the more review sites they're on, the better. The more positive you see, the better. But there are some testimonials, obviously, that will be selected or featured on their website that are probably overly positive. Or if you go on certain websites, they might show the best reviews first. So there are some ways to go about looking at reviews in a more objective way. So one of the biggest ones is Yelp. I'm sure many of you use this already, but I don't know if you all are aware here of one of the ways that you can use Yelp. So I have here a search that I just did for HVAC near me. And just to show you here a couple things, you can sort by recommended, highest rated, or most reviewed. I like searching by most reviewed. And the reason why is because if they have more reviews, they might more likely have been in business longer. But also, you can see which ones have the most reviews and the highest, right? So see this one here, 701 reviews, 587, 489. So, I mean, this one just looks so great. They have so many reviews and it's all 5 stars. So looking it up in this way can really be helpful. The other thing as well, if you notice, I had to scroll a long way to get past all these sponsored results. I cannot believe Yelp has put so many sponsored businesses, and it's not necessarily that they're bad or anything. I just think that, you know, they're there for a reason because they're paying. So I scroll past these typically, and then I go down to where it says all results in California or wherever you are. So let's check out Manny's, for example. So what this is going to tell you is they have a verified license, but I would confirm it again on your own. It's a good place to start, though. At least Yelp did confirm it probably at some point. And you can even pull up their license information right away. So you could do a license search on your own instantly on InfomatchPlus if you wanted to. And then you can scroll down. I usually don't go by the review highlights. Again, it's just going to show you the best, right, that they have. So I like to get down and find the dirt here. So one way to do it is by filtering by 1-star reviews. So you can do that here and filter by 1 star, or you can sort it by lowest rated. I like doing it this way because what I typically want to see, these are also listed in order of date. If there's any recent bad reviews and how many recently, right? So if I look at this one, there's one bad one here in 2023. What was the owner's response? And then I go back, well, the one before that was in 2022. So they've only had one really, really bad review this year. So that's better than seeing, a ton of bad reviews in the last few months, which might mean that the business is going downhill. So just because they have the 4.5, 5-star rating, it doesn't mean that they're still operating at that level. Things happen to businesses and they can go down south real quick. And one of the best ways to know is to go onto Yelp and do this type of sort and see what's happening in recent times, right? What are they most recently working like? And then another thing that a lot of people don't know about Yelp is that there is a whole section here of underneath the numbers of the pages, 75 other reviews that are currently not recommended. Now, these reviews are usually not recommended either because they're too short, or they may be overly positive or overly negative, or the user who left the review has absolutely no history, so Yelp doesn't feel like they are real. But a lot of times they are. Actually, most of the time they are. And this is all done by an algorithm on Yelp. So, nobody's picking these out by hand and saying they're bad reviews, but you might find, some 1-stars here that aren't displayed to the public. So I highly encourage you to look at those hidden reviews to get the full picture of who it is that you're working with. The other thing as well that I think is great is Google, obviously searching for the name in quotes. So you're getting that exact search, and for any keywords like scam or fraud after that, typically that will pull up, any sort of cases that have come up with that. I even go to Google News and do a separate search. So a regular search and a Google News search is great. Facebook has right now like a not recommend and recommend status. So it's not the greatest at giving reviews, but it's a place to start. You can see if they're active on there. And on LinkedIn, you can also check, let's say, the company there, if they have employees, and if it seems to be a legitimate company, a lot of times they'll be in LinkedIn. So that can help confirm at least the legitimacy of the company. You can also do the Secretary of State. You should be doing this anyway for all companies. The way that you do it is pretty easy. It's free to do in all states. So you just Google Secretary of State business search, and you can do it for California here. So I put in Manny, right, for the search, and it came up. And it looks like, status active, standing is all good. Tells me, the address, who's the individual. So now I have a name that I could do a background search on. This is probably the owner here of the company. So, there's definitely a lot of information that you can get for free. The only state you have to pay a few dollars in is Texas. So definitely take advantage of that information. It is 100% free. So again, some other ones, Yellow Pages, Thumbtack, Porch. These are all sites that can match you with a vendor, but of course, don't take those websites' word for it, because anybody can pay to get listed on those sites. You want to also make sure that you're checking them and doing all of your data research that we already talked about as well. But this is a good place to start. Now, the Better Business Bureau, that's another really good one as well. Typically, that will come up with really bad reviews if you're looking there. Sometimes it'll say that they are accredited Better Business Bureau businesses. I wouldn't really take that to hold much weight, to be honest. Most businesses can pay for accreditation as long as they don't have any overly negative reviews and they pay a fee. So that doesn't really mean that they're any better, but just that they paid to have a badge. All right, so I'm going to go over just some more vendor tips here to close this off. So we had an AAOA member who recently shared her story in Rent Magazine, and she hired a handyman vendor that ended up costing her property management company thousands of dollars. So she's a property manager. She owns a property management company. She's used to hiring vendors, okay? And she hired a vendor that she thought had great reviews, had been doing already pretty good work, but then they later received 2 tenant complaints. And they found that one complaint was where the vendor had done subpar work, basically laying new floor on top of rotting subfloor. And then another one where they had an unfinished job. They literally brought supplies to the job site and just left them there and didn't start any of the work. And so the tenant complained because all their stuff was there. So upon review by the maintenance coordination team, they found that the vendor had reported both of those jobs completed, and they weren't. And they had already been paid for their work for doing it. So when she started to reach out to them to figure out what happened here, they wouldn't answer their phone. They wouldn't answer their emails. They basically ghosted her. So now a little bit more time goes by, a few days, and they start investigating and finding more and more issues. They got a call from one of their clients, a landlord, who reached out about a maintenance expense on their owner's statement. And they questioned why they had been charged for installation of a brand new water heater when the water heater at the property was barely a year old. And what they did was they obviously investigated it to see what had happened. It turns out the vendor had communicated an urgent need for a water heater, and it was approved. And the invoice said they had to replace it completely, absolutely had to. What they actually did was remove the serial number from the existing water heater and attempt to pass it off as new. They pocketed the cash. Yes, this is absolutely direct fraud, and it should have been caught by the property management company, our AAOA member, before it happened. And it did cost them a lot of money to make things right with their client and also with the tenants, and not to mention taking the vendor to court, which they eventually had to do quite a bit to find out where they were, because obviously they weren't answering their phone or anything like that. So there are some tips here that we could learn from this. One is get feedback from tenants before you're paying your invoices to make sure that the job was actually completed. If you have a large portfolio and it's just simply not possible for you to verify every single work order, you should be giving new vendors extra scrutiny, particularly in the first 90 days. So definitely keep an eye on everything they do for those first 90 days until you can sort of let them and maybe trust them a little bit more. Also, clarify expectations around processes and pricing. So require vendors to include the age of the unit, the cost to replace, and the cost to repair prior to work beginning so that you can approve it. Make sure that you can actually determine if it's a necessary repair that needs to be made. Also, require and verify liability insurance. You should get listed as an additional insured and randomly audit policies. So getting listed as an additional insured helps extend the protection to you, but also randomly auditing. Now, key here is random, right? So you don't want them to have insurance just because they know that you're going to check on them. So if you do a random audit of their policy, you'll be able to more likely catch any lapses in insurance. Also, quality control. So also, another random audit schedule to ensure that they are completing all the tasks that they are billing for. That is very common where vendors say they did something, they bill for it, but they didn't actually do it. And also implement asset management controls. So gather data about your property, get to know your property. And if you're a property manager on this call, please get to know your landlord's properties that you are managing. What's the age? What's the model number? Are there warranties? What are the brands? So that when you are working with a vendor, you are speaking the same language and you are aware of what they are doing and why they are making certain requests. At the end of the day, vendor and vendor management is critical to the success of property managers and landlords. And you can get substantial liability if a vendor fails to adhere to your standards. You'll not only have potentially inflated maintenance costs if they're charging you for things that you don't need, but also that leads to diminishing returns on your investment property and ultimately the financial performance of the property, not to mention a potential issue with your reputation if you're making tenants unhappy, or if your property manager, if your landlord client finds out that you haven't done your due diligence. So to that end, it's essential for you to ensure that all maintenance requests are completely necessary, that they're performed at competitive pricing, completed to the expected standard, and most importantly, that they've all passed your background check and that you've done your due diligence process, especially in those first 90 days. All right, so let's move on to property managers. This is going to be one of the last things we cover here today. I'm not going to go over all these questions. I'm just going to put it up here on the screen. You're going to get a copy of this tomorrow, so don't worry. You can copy and paste all these questions if you do want them. But if you are on this call and you are looking to hire a property manager, you have to know that you are never going to be a completely passive investor. If you hire a property manager, you need to manage your property manager. And you need to ask them the right questions to ensure they are a good fit for what you are looking for. Make sure that you're not met with any surprise fees later. Sometimes property managers, they're not dishonest. They just don't tell you everything. It's in the contract. But if you don't read it, if you don't ask questions, certainly you may not ever be made aware until it's too late. And then you're really looking at huge fees for something you thought was included already in your property management contract. Also, as we saw, very important for you to ask your property managers if they run background checks on their employees, and also if they train their employees in fair housing, because ultimately they are going to have face-to-face contact with your tenants. They are representing you. So this is extremely important. Don't skip out on asking these questions. Be that annoying person if you have to be. Don't be shy. I think there's never too many questions that you can ask. So let's almost finish here with some final thoughts. So essentially, I hope what you've taken from this is that we live in an age where fraud activities are on the rise. Safeguard yourself, please, and implement these pretty simple but effective strategies to scam-proof your life and protect yourself and your business. That means thoroughly researching and vetting your property managers, your healthcare professionals, your vendors, anybody really that you are entrusting. And remember that your safety and your peace of mind is definitely worth every effort. Just to conclude here, this is the InfomatchPlus website. So this is what I've been referring to. I do want to finish off here with one last poll question. If you did want to get a $20 credit to run a background check on their website, go ahead and mark yes, and I can go ahead and send that to you after the call. That would be enough to cover a criminal background check, but there's a bunch, obviously all the other reports that we went over. So you can go ahead and vote there. And now I think we are ready for some questions. So my contact information is here on the screen. And if I don't get to your question, please email me, or if I see your question, I'll probably email you. But certainly save my info. I am more accessible than you think, and I would love to help you with any questions you have. We are going to be sending this recording to everyone tomorrow. So please keep an eye out on your email tomorrow for that. And I'm going to start taking questions, particularly in the question box. So if you've put any questions in the chat, please put them in the question box right now so that I can start going through what we need to do. Looks like there's not that many in the question box. So please go over to the question box. Yes, so the correct name is InfomatchPlus. So this is here, InfomatchPlus.com is the website. Okay, Javier, in which report can you find out if a person or owner of a company has an ongoing lawsuit? So this would be a civil judgments report for the person and a business credit report if you're looking for a lawsuit against a business. Says, Carol says here, maybe you already said this, but what does a background check cost with instant background searches, and what is included with that cost? So the costs vary depending on the reports. They are a bit more than tenants screening reports just because of the additional licenses required for this purpose. But here are some idea of some of the pricing that you can get. And here's some of the good ones that I think are great for financials and whatnot. So that'll give you an idea of some of the prices. Once you create an account here, which is free, you can just click register now. I'll send you this link tomorrow in the email. But once you register, you'll have option to all of it. So you'll be able to see what all the prices are there. All right. Let's see, Lisa, Yelp charges the business an exorbitant amount fee to get referrals from them. Contact the business directly rather than using their email or messaging. I agree. That's probably the best way to do it. I do prefer to just call directly versus through the Yelp app. I know they do get charged for that. It's kind of crazy how Yelp is making so much money off of this. They have lots of ways to generate income. So Jeraven asking, do we need to notify tenants in reference to background check? Yes. So you do need to notify tenants, but we are using these searches for, the way I'm speaking about it is for vendors or maintenance professionals, so not non-tenants. And for non-tenants, you don't. So just if they're a tenant, you absolutely do have to notify them and have them sign a rental application, or electronically through the AAOA system, they can sign also, but they do have to give permission to some degree. And that's only if they're tenants, right? Howard agreed with me that 60 Minutes did a report on the BBB, and if the business does not pay the annual fee to BBB, they give you a bad BBB rating. Yeah, so BBB, take it with a grain of salt for sure. I didn't know 60 Minutes did a report on that. That's really interesting, Howard. I'd love to see what was on that report. And yes, Jeraven, some reviews are fake. Totally understand. That's why it's so good to look at multiple review sites and sort by all the different types of reviews that might be on there. All right, let's see here. Yes, so Howard also mentioned that in New York City, there's a bill introduced prohibiting landlords from performing criminal background checks, credit score checks. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. And for tenants, that is something that is more heavily regulated. And there are cities like New York City and San Francisco that are really trying to completely eliminate the ability to do it, which I think is a huge mistake, obviously. We'll see what happens with those pieces of legislation, but it's just so important to screen your tenants if you can. So definitely when that comes out, we'll probably, hopefully it doesn't pass, but if it does, we'll let you know what you can do. Yeah, Linda Hartman, would you say you needed to run a full check? Nothing in writing, nothing in writing. This is all public record information. So the only one that you need to do, which isn't out yet on InfomatchPlus, is the personal credit check and the drug test. So those you do need to let them know. Otherwise, if you have their date of birth and name, you can run the criminal. Preferably, if you could also get a social, that opens up all the other reports as well that you could get. Rose says, I thought California already prohibits a criminal background check on tenants. That's incorrect. There is a regulation in the city of Oakland. That is the only city that has that does prohibit criminal background checks on tenants. But otherwise, the entire state of California, the rest of California, you can. All right. So let's see. Maybe you already said this, says Carol, but what does a background check cost with instant background searches? Okay, we went over that. How does one verify the validity of reviews, since it is possible to hire companies to boost SEO? Yeah, so certainly, companies can do a lot to try to, I guess, fake good reviews, right? You can have your family and friends do it. You can have an SEO company find ways to go about it, but it becomes harder to fake when it's on a lot of different websites. And also, if you can ask for a real life reference, that would be really awesome. I mean, who knows what number they'll give you, but I mean, the more, in my opinion, with tenants and with this, the more requirements you have, the harder it is to fake every time you add a new layer. It's just that much harder for them to make up. So certainly it can happen. Businesses can have fake reviews, especially on their website, obviously, because they can put whatever they want on there. But I think looking at Google reviews, Yelp reviews, Facebook reviews, Angie's List and Yellow Pages, those all, if they're all good on all those platforms, that is a little bit harder to fake. All right. So who's asking, how can one do searching on one's own rather than paying too much? So To be honest, you can probably do some of these searches, but the time and effort that it takes is going to be tough. And if you don't know what you're looking for, it's not going to be easy to find. So some courts do charge fees as well that are much higher than the fees that InfomatchPlus would incur. And so they won't pass that along to you because InfomatchPlus gets a better deal. So in some cases, it actually just might be more cost effective even to use InfomatchPlus. And also in terms of time, there's no beating searching literally every single court database in all 50 states. You know how long that would take you? That could take years for you to search everything, right? So this is one single search that is very quickly done across the entire country. Sue, yes, I'll give you the PDF of. Let's see. Carol, can you use these background checks for anything? Yes, you absolutely can. And are these checks that email the person who check is being done when they approve the check? So no, the person would not get an email unless it's that one product that isn't out yet on InfomatchPlus for personal credit information. Judy says, excellent information. You're welcome. Thank you, Judy. That's very, very nice of you to say. All right. And are there any phone alerts about the webinars? I keep missing the emails as the inbox gets flooded. You know, Joji, I've been thinking about adding text messaging to our notifications. If that's something y'all are interested in, please, when you leave in the exit survey, go ahead and leave it in the comments that you would like to be texted for webinar notifications. I feel like some people, they also don't like sharing their phone number. So I don't know, email seems to be easier to get people to share, but if you want a text notification, I think we can get that set up. So go ahead and put that in the exit survey when you leave, let me know. All right, let's see what else we got. Basuki, I was told that it is not recommended to deny tenancy based on criminal record. Yeah, I mean, definitely you can still do it, but you do have to be careful to follow HUD guidelines. So these are all guidelines that apply for tenancy, but not for anything else. So everything we discussed today wouldn't apply to, but yes, if you have a tenant, you want to make sure that you're following the right guidelines. If you are denying them for a criminal record, there is nothing federally that says that you can't do that, but there are some guidelines which technically aren't law, right? But they are heavily enforced. So if you are taken to court for using a criminal background check incorrectly for tenancy, you want to show that you followed all of those guidelines to make a stronger case for yourself. So, we've covered this in other webinars, and I can definitely refer you to those after the webinar as well, if you want to go back and rewatch any of the ones that we've done on running background checks on tenants, which is different. Okay. RL says, I noticed that Yelp often shows reviews that are not relevant to the company search. Yes, so Yelp does do that, similar to Amazon, when you're shopping on Amazon and you'll see recommended for you. That's kind of what they're trying to do. So they're trying to give more traffic to sponsored results by featuring related businesses within the business itself. It's kind of confusing, honestly, and I've read some of them before thinking that it was for the business. I don't love how Yelp does that, but again, they're just trying to make money every which way they can. So it doesn't really always make for the best user experience. All right, Ed asking, who are the competitors to InfomatchPlus? So there are definitely some websites that have some data. I think InfomatchPlus is definitely one of the ones that has the most easy to access data that's actually actionable. So there are some of those like people search kind of websites where you can search people, but it's not necessarily going to give you accurate results. If you have any websites that aren't asking you for date of birth, then that alone is a red flag. A lot of them aren't actually giving you, a court search. They're just searching the web. So you want to make sure that the data that you're getting is going to be from court databases, and that's often going to cost a little bit more, and it's going to require date of birth, but you're going to get much more accurate information. Is AOA affiliated with InfomatchPlus? So we're not at this time, but I think what we wanted to do here was, partner with them to give you a good idea of some of these, best practices for you to start to incorporate. And this is such a great resource that I thought it made sense to use it as a potential case study here. So let me go ahead and stop my share here. So certainly, you can research other companies to see if there are others that could work for you. But I do feel that we have a really great, website that already has a court record data. So that to me says a lot. So I can go ahead and send you, some information about that after the webinar. All right. And let's see if I can find any other questions that maybe came up a while back. I know we're way over on time. So of course, if you have to leave, I understand. Let's see here. Okay. Rose says she asked for a declaration page of liability insurance and workman's comp. That's awesome. That's also a great idea. All right. So I think I've searched through just to make sure I didn't miss anything. I know we have some comments here of people who are a little venting about our background check laws and the war on landlords. And, there is certainly, many legislative laws, pieces of legislation, I should say, that are out there that are targeting landlords, especially post-pandemic, right? So we saw a lot of tenants that enjoyed these more tenant-friendly protections due to COVID, and they want to keep them, right? They don't want to let go of them. And so we're definitely seeing a lot more pieces of legislation that are tenant-friendly popping up, even in states that aren't traditionally blue. So we'll be covering that as it comes up, anything relevant. I do encourage you to also subscribe to our newsletter, so you can get updates on those kind of pieces of legislation. That is one of the best ways to just know what's going on. So yeah. Why still landlords, not landladies? That's funny. All right. Well, guys, I think this pretty much wraps it up. I hope that you all learned something new today and that you take this and use it. Use it for your business. Think about these things. Let's be smart. Let's use our common sense and good business practices. Please take my exit survey as you leave. I want to know what you thought of this webinar. I would appreciate it if you could be as honest as possible. I have thick skin. I just want to know what you think. And I want to make sure we can keep making every webinar better. We have some amazing webinars coming up on the schedule that I am really excited about. In the email tomorrow, I'm going to send you the upcoming webinar. And it'll be related to tax deferment and investing. So I think that'll be a great one for you to join next week. So keep an eye out for that. And you're welcome to everyone. We'll be sending the recording tomorrow again with the slides. So stay tuned for that. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. You're welcome. All right, everyone, take care. Bye.